Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you break free from chronic inflammation and get your life back. I'm Dr. Rachel Yeager, naturopathic doctor and medical intuitive, and the founder of the Surviving to Thriving method of chronic illness recovery. Join me as we uncover strategies for overcoming health challenges and restoring your physical, mental, emotional, and soul health. Together, let's embark on a journey to thriving. Hello, I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. By request, we are going to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome today. We're going to talk about what causes it, what's going on in the body, what's responsible for the symptoms, and a loose outline of what would be in the roadmap to heal from chronic fatigue syndrome. So we will start with what is chronic fatigue syndrome. Chronic fatigue syndrome is more than just feeling tired. It's where you feel like your body is exhausted every day. Napping doesn't do much, might give you a little bit more energy. You could have all the sleep in the world. So it's not just sleep deprivation. You could sleep 10, maybe your body even wants you to sleep 12 hours, and you still would not be well rested all day. And with chronic fatigue syndrome, there's often other symptoms involved. So it's like fibromyalgia, where fatigue is the primary symptom, but we're commonly looking at brain fog happening too. Maybe we have some flu-like feelings. Maybe mood is affected. So we're noticing low mood and maybe some anxiety. And with chronic fatigue syndrome, there is often also difficulty with recovering from exercise. So you might exercise. This is an exercise you've been doing forever previously before you started feeling ill. And now you can't bounce back. And if you overdo it one day, you are borrowing from tomorrow. And in the beginning stages of chronic fatigue syndrome, it's really hard to tell what your body's limits are. And so a lot of people end up accidentally borrowing spoons from the next day. So if we think of the spoon theory to help describe chronic fatigue, we only have so many spoons at the start of each day. These are our energy units. We can't control how many spoons we're going to wake up with. We can maybe try to influence it, but we can't control it. And maybe we wake up one day with 4 spoons, and maybe we wake up the next day with 10 spoons, and maybe the next day we have 2. And if you only have 2 spoons that day, and it's 1 spoon to brush your teeth and brush your hair, and it's 2 spoons to unload the dishwasher. Well, if you do all of those things, then you just used 3 spoons, and you used more than your daily allotment of 2 for that day, of how much energy your cells were able to make that day. But you're going to pay for it tomorrow, because the next day you're not going to have enough energy. You're going to have more symptoms. You might feel like you're flaring, and then it's going to take possibly days. Sometimes it even takes weeks to recover. So that's chronic fatigue syndrome. And chronic fatigue, the symptom in itself, can be associated with a lot of different things. And honestly, it's a really similar workup, whether someone has chronic fatigue as an ongoing symptom or whether someone has actual chronic fatigue syndrome. And chronic fatigue syndrome is simply a diagnosis of exclusion. So once we have ruled out all the other things, then we say, okay, it must be chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's supposed to be a diagnosis of exclusion. However, more and more, I am seeing people diagnose chronic fatigue syndrome without even ruling out hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's as a cause of low energy, without ruling out autoimmune disease as a cause of low energy. So the first thing I do when someone comes to me with either chronic fatigue as a symptom or chronic fatigue syndrome is I'm going to make sure that we're not missing any really clear first line physiological causes, that we're not missing low thyroid, that we're not missing an absolutely tanked level of progesterone, which most doctors aren't testing for. I want to make sure that we're not missing a super low level of cortisol, which is your stress energy hormone. We want to check all of these things that could explain the fatigue first before we just say, okay, now we need to move on to the next more complicated second layer of screening here. So once we've ruled out all those first things, and it's still possible, by the way, to have hypothyroidism and chronic fatigue syndrome but also not really because chronic fatigue syndrome is a diagnosis of exclusion. So it's only until you have successfully treated the hypothyroidism that then you could actually say, this is still chronic fatigue syndrome. And I would like to share that I don't think that chronic fatigue syndrome is a quote, real diagnosis. And before anyone gets upset at hearing me say that, I'm not invalidating your experience. I'm not invalidating that it is a real thing. I myself have been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and I deal with this. And by saying that it's not a real diagnosis, I just mean that chronic fatigue syndrome is a diagnosis that describes a symptom. That's like telling someone who is having pelvic pain that they have vulvodynia, which literally means pain in that region. That isn't a diagnosis for anything. That's just diagnosis language that is describing the symptom of how your body is manifesting that something is wrong. So, surely the cause of chronic fatigue syndrome is going to be mitochondrial fatigue. The cells aren't able to make enough energy. It might be hidden infections. We're talking viral infections, parasitic, which means all different types of parasites. Sometimes we're talking about the little protozoa, amoeba-like parasites. What could be fungal infections? It could be so many things. And so if we're going to tell someone that they have chronic fatigue syndrome, then we need to be willing to look into the root causes of what's going on behind it. So the way to check into those things, there's multiple ways to do it. I like to combine science and biochemistry with natural and holistic approaches and use all the tools that are available to us so that we have the most efficient outcome and we can be the most informed and make really methodical, purposeful steps in our health journey. So I like to actually run labs. Here, a lot of them can be run through conventional insurance covered labs. They don't have to be these functional thousands of dollars specialty tests. So first step is checking for, is there something that is triggering this mitochondrial fatigue? Is there an infection that the body is trying to fight? Is there an environmental biotoxin like mold exposure that the body is trying to fight? And we go through and we check for each thing. And we're not just shooting in the dark with labs. We are doing a really thorough symptom assessment because I can tell based on symptoms whether someone is having an excess histamine response or not. We don't even need labs to determine whether someone's mast cells are hyperactive. We can simply do a thorough symptom assessment as long as you're working with someone who knows what they're looking for, knows the right questions to ask, and is able to recognize the patterns and how these biochemical reactions in the body are going to show up symptom-wise. Once we narrow things down, next step is ordering labs. Labs are going to help us get clear info and help us rule in or out certain things. And then once we have our answers, then we go after starting to treat the root causes. And in the meantime, we are trying to give some symptom relief for this chronic fatigue. So what can we do to help support that thyroid just a little bit more and help balance that cortisol stress energy hormone curve just a little bit more and help optimize sleep as much as possible and use diet and nutrition tools to get a balanced amount of fat and protein to carry your adrenals throughout the day. All of these things that we can be doing so that even if we can't help your cells make more energy immediately, we can still get more energy from other resources to help cover in the meantime while we work on the underlying factors. And while we work on these root causes, there are really great mitochondrial supports, mitochondria being the energy powerhouses of our cells. So we can help our cells make more energy by giving them the nutrients they need that were probably used up when our body was fighting inflammation. And we can help make our cell membranes stronger so that they're not full of these oxidized, inflammatory, weak fats. We have strong cell membranes, then we also are going to have stronger mitochondrial membranes within the cell, and our cell is going to function better. It's going to work better, it's going to communicate better, and it's going to be able to make us more energy. So we can do all these things at the same time. We start by knowing that we're going to be going after the root cause, but we're also trying to help with getting some more energy in the meantime, looking at all of the interplay of different diet and lifestyle factors that we can modify as well as we go through. And I like to blend a combination of herbal supports with vitamins and nutraceuticals, with sometimes over the counter medication supports, with counseling people about their different medication options. Not all pharmaceuticals are bad. Some can actually help us prevent long term permanent damage and act as a helpful band aid while we work on the root cause. So we do all of this. We blend it all together with lifestyle and diet. And there's other types of supplements that we can use too in the meantime that are going to be supportive and nourishing and not have harmful side effects or toxic effects on our cells. And we also need to consider the brain. Similar to the previous talk about autoimmunity, our brain is just an organ in our body. You can't have chronic fatigue syndrome without having inflammation. It was some type of inflammation that is damaging the mitochondria in the cells. And wherever the inflammation is coming from, at some point down the line, it doesn't really matter. It's all going to cause the same thing. Chronic inflammation is chronic inflammation no matter what angle it's coming from. And this chronic inflammation wears on our cells. It imbalances our hormones. It imbalances thyroid, cortisol, and our sex hormones. It even imbalances our blood sugar, can cause us to have insulin resistance, so we gain weight. Can also affect the leptin receptor in our brain. So we can feel different appetite cues that don't make sense, where we don't feel full or we do feel full, and we don't feel hungry or we do. And when we affect that leptin hunger hormone, that actually does more than just give our body hunger cues. It tells our body what to do with the food we eat. So if we have leptin resistance from brain inflammation, then our body is going to store every single thing we eat as fat. And it's just going to store it away, and it's going to tell our body to pack on the pounds. And we know that it is quite possible to be very healthy at different weights. What happens with this chronic inflammation is the way that the weight is being distributed and the way it's being held in our body often doesn't feel good. It can almost feel like you're in someone else's body. It can just feel uncomfortable, like you can't do the daily life activities with the ease that you want to be able to do them. And sometimes people don't feel as good in their bodies when they have this kind of inflammation weight gain. So if there is inflammation weight gain, and if it's to the point where someone doesn't feel good in their body, then we can also help resensitize those insulin receptors. We can help the body learn where the proper weight homeostasis is so that they can help regulate weight back to normal and regulate all the metabolic processes. Cholesterol might have skyrocketed while chronic inflammation was happening. A really common misconception about cholesterol is that it's just mostly from your diet. Cholesterol is actually a band-aid that our blood vessels use to protect themselves from inflammation in the bloodstream. And our body makes 80% of our cholesterol. We only get 20% of it from our diet. Our liver is making the rest on purpose. So with high cholesterol, if it's crazy sky high, higher than full hundreds, then that can mean we have a genetic predisposition for our liver to make a lot. However, if it's just a regular elevation, that usually means inflammation. And inflammation is more likely to come from sugar and different inflammatory factors in the body than someone eating a steak. So I have a very different view about diet and nutrition than a lot of other naturopathic doctors. And I find that some people are hesitant to establish with a naturopathic doctor because they think they're going to have to go on a very restrictive diet. I am a fan of doing the least restriction possible. If someone has celiac disease, do you absolutely need to cut out gluten? Yes. However, if you are eating gluten and you're not having any issues with it, if you cut it out, then if you try to introduce it in the future, it's possible your body won't be able to tolerate it. And we already know that the brain is inflamed when we have these ongoing things. And so anything that's restricting more than necessary is going to be really hard, and it's going to affect our mood more than it would if we weren't feeling sick. It's going to be stressful, and we need to keep stress as low as possible so that we can heal. And at some point, if we restrict food too much, then our body just starts reacting to the second layer of inflammatory foods, even if we cut out the first tier. So it really depends on why we're doing it, what we're doing it for. There is absolutely a time and a place to try something like a gluten-free diet or a dairy-free diet or an egg-free diet, or to think about temporarily doing a diet that's not going to see bad gut bacteria, or to think about if the body has a nightshade sensitivity or other food sensitivities or not. That can serve a time and a place. The issues when we try to use that as the sole management outside, of course, celiac disease, because there is something else that is causing the gut to be leaky, to be permeable, so that the body developed a response and sensitivity to these foods in the first place. So if we use only food restriction to manage, which is unfortunately what I see some holistic nutritionists doing. Some of my patients have previously seen holistic nutritionists and they ran something like a GI MAC test and then they have them restrict certain foods as a treatment. That should never be the treatment itself outside of celiac disease, should always be a Band-Aid support. Similar to how I use pharmaceutical supports, the body might need those for a time to help keep inflammation low and prevent damage and allow for better healing temporarily. But we don't ever want permanent restriction to be the goal. We want that to be a temporary thing. There are always, of course, exceptions, and I'm generalizing to make my points here, but in general, least restrictive diet that we can get away with. And one of the comorbidities, so one of the coexisting conditions that can happen with chronic fatigue syndrome is mast cell activation. And we'll talk about mast cell activation syndrome a little bit more in the future because this is a very big area. But basically, it's part of the body having too much histamine, which is a very specific type of inflammation. And if we have this ongoing type of histamine inflammation, that's going to make all of our tissues leaky, and that's going to contribute to the leaky gut. It's going to contribute to brain fog. It's going to make our body not tolerate food. It's going to make us sensitive to chemicals and scents and smells. It's going to make our mood feel more easily affected. And eventually, it's going to affect all the organs in our body, just like inflammation does. This is just a type of inflammation. So chronic fatigue syndrome rarely occurs alone. There's usually mast cell activation with it, or there's a type of fibromyalgia pain happening alongside with it, which just means that your nerves and your brain are inflamed. We could talk about fibromyalgia more in the future. There's often autoimmunity that goes hand in hand with chronic fatigue syndrome. And the root of chronic fatigue syndrome is always something. There is always something that triggered your body to make less energy from your cells. Your body doesn't just spontaneously wake up one day not making enough, with your mitochondria not functioning enough in your cells. Finding the root cause, super important, helping balance hormones and helping boost energy while we do the root cause treatment, which takes time, is important so that you can be as comfortable as possible. There's no need to suffer unnecessarily. If there are supports that we could be doing, as long as we're not going to be permanently harmful and there's something that you feel okay with and that meet your preferences. And the other part of chronic fatigue syndrome is often coming out of fight or flight. So our brain subconsciously, without us choosing this, goes into a fight or flight, kind of like a frozen state while we're dealing with chronic illness. The body knows something's wrong. The body knows that the immune system is fighting something. Whether you know what your immune system is fighting or that you even know that's happening or not, your body knows. And so if we treat just the physical body and we only try to treat our body like it's a car going to an auto mechanic and we neglect everything that could be going on in the brain, we're not going to get fully recovered because the brain is extremely important for our healing. If we're in a fight or flight state, which I honestly have never met anyone with chronic inflammation who is not, even if they didn't think they were mentally, their body was. So if we are going to stay in that state, our body suppresses our immune system. So our immune system can't attack the foreign invaders that it needs to. It shuts down our digestion. So we're not going to absorb the nutrients that we need to help lower the inflammation and heal and repair our damaged cells. We're also going to have symptoms, indigestion. The inflammation in the gut can lead to the gut being leaky. We're going to have basically heightened, worse emotional responses for stress, adaptability, and on. All things that make it really hard for our body to recover. Our cells are literally paused from repairing themselves while we're in this state. So if we can shift the brain back into a rest and digest state and let it know that while all of this is going on, while all of these physical threats are happening in the body, you are still safe and there is still safety to be found amidst all the chaos and pain and difficulty of this journey, then the body actually can shift back into that rest state and healing is going to happen so much in a much more efficient way because it's like you're walking downhill instead of trying to trudge uphill. So we can do this with brain rewiring exercises and safety cues for the body, literally physically helping out the body so that your body knows that something's being addressed physically can help also. And if we have support, so if you know, and if something is happening in your body, you have someone that you can ask about it. You could ask about every treatment that you're going to do. You can ask about every symptom you're feeling. You could ask what makes something an emergency or not. You could ask why you're having heart palpitations. You could ask what all this means and what your root causes are. You have that kind of support, then your body can go out of problem-solving mode, which puts you in fight or flight, and get into that rest and healing mode. If you don't have that kind of support, and you are still having to fully advocate for yourself in between your doctor visits and come up with your agenda at your doctor visits, trying to squeeze everything in, trying to do all of the work of managing your health like it's a part-time or even a full-time job, then you're staying in problem-solving mode. And that is totally understandable, but it will keep your brain from going into rest and repair mode. So I like to work with people in a very supportive way so that I can be there to answer all the questions. I can be right with you. I can be on your team. You can know that we're not going to do anything that doesn't feel like it's good on a gut feeling level with you. And if you have any hesitations or if we're talking about doing something and you know you're not going to want to do that, then you feel open and free to let me know. And I'm always going to go by your preferences because it's not about me. It's about helping you recover your health. And so whatever we do needs to work for you, be a good fit for you, and feel good for you. And if we have that kind of relationship and we work really intimately together, you feel like you can be really open and share all of your concerns and any kind of intuition that you have. Some people know that they feel like they have something going on, like a parasitic infection. And they feel like they can't tell any of their doctors because they're not going to take them seriously. My relationship with my patients and clients is fully open, and I have seen it all, and parasites are absolutely a possibility. So I like having that open relationship, that kind of support with the people I work with, and that kind of support helps us rewire the brain. But not only are we doing the most comprehensive, holistic physical support, but we are also supporting that brain. So if you have any more questions about this, I do have a video on my YouTube channel outlining this whole interplay of inflammation with brain health and some things that you can actually start to do at home to support your brain health. So definitely check that out. I'll link that below in the show notes. And if you would like to have any topics covered in the future, or if you have any questions about this, please check out the resources below to reach out to me, and I would love to connect. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Surviving to Thriving podcast. I hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to support your journey towards better health and happiness. Remember, each health journey is unique. This podcast is not medical advice, and it's essential to consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes. If you'd like to schedule a complimentary consultation with me, I would love to talk with you. Please go to drrachelyeager.com/schedule.